I wasn't really sure where else to post this, so I thought I'd just post it here. I tried to post it on Reddit, but all of the subs for this kind of thing don't allow real stories and just want fiction, so I thought it might be more appreciated here and help me get it off my chest. I've never browsed here before, but I've read a lot of Greentext on other sites, so I figured, how hard could it possibly be? Basically, I have worked as a dispatcher for 911 for the past 7, going on 8 years in the state of California, and in my time, I have had to deal with a lot of incredibly disturbing calls that have given me nightmares. This is going to sound desensitized and f***ed up, but realistically, most of the calls I've had to deal with aren't anything that would shock you or scare you. Maybe a few years ago, they would have sent a few shivers up your spine. But as a whole, we've all gotten so used to gore and messed up cases that it wouldn't even make you bat an eyelid anymore. I've heard women be kidnapped while on the phone to me, never to be found again, most likely to be human trafficked or have God knows what done to her. I've heard of children being murdered by home intruders and having to witness all sorts of horrible things. I do have one call that happened to me though in the past few weeks that I have been racking my brains over, trying to figure out if it was real or some kind of elaborate prank being played on me by someone who was way too into it. This is something that has seriously stuck with me and that I am hoping you can maybe help me make some sense of and figure out what is going on. I will do my best attempt at Greentext from what I've seen on Reddit. Be me, 911 dispatcher with multiple years of experience. This one time I was working a late shift, and it must have just gone maybe 2 AM or so. The shift was pretty normal for the most part, if you could ever call what I deal with normal. Probably the worst thing reported all night was a couple of break-ins to some local small businesses, but no violence ensued, just some petty theft and damages. I think my shift was scheduled to finish around 9 AM or so, and I still had a long time to go. Around 2:05 AM, I get a call. I pick up as usual and start with my usual spiel of asking what the emergency was and the name of the caller and all that jazz. I am trained to ask as many questions as possible and get as much accurate information as possible while help is on the way so that they are prepared to assist long before they get there. I greet the caller, but I do not get any response. I can hear a kind of shuffling, like the phone was maybe in a pocket and was rubbing up against fabric, but I still got no response. I hear some more shifting, and as I call out again, a voice suddenly shushes me on the other end. I could hear pained breathing, like they were on the verge of a panic attack and were trying their hardest not to break down completely. They continued with a couple of rapid, shallow breaths, and then they started to whisper to me. It was a man on the other end. It was hard to tell how old he was from the tone of his whisper, but he did not sound old at all. He told me just to listen and that he could not raise his voice as he didn't know when the man would be coming back. He told me that he would tell me as much as he could until he came back, and that I needed to be silent or the man would know that he called 911. He took a few deep breaths to compose himself and started to list off as much as he could while trying to remain as silent as possible. He started by telling me he didn't know exactly where he was. He gave his name and where he worked, and we were able to track his social media quite quickly to find a suitable picture of the man in case any witnesses nearby could possibly help with tracking him down. He said that he woke up, strapped to a weird kind of dentist chair with straps holding down his limbs and neck. I looked over to my supervisor who was on shift with me, and he mentioned that they were struggling to pinpoint where this man was, as the phone was only pinging off of one cell phone tower and that it was not enough to fully track him down. They had dispatched a unit into the approximate area and were on standby until he could be fully located. They just needed more time. The signal of the call was horrendous too, and very often his voice would turn into a muffled robot and I would just have to try and make out as much as I possibly could. He told me that after a few hours, he was able to loosen one of the leather straps so that he could move his left wrist, but that his arm was still stuck. His neck was restrained, so he could not see the entire room, but he mentioned that he thought he might be underground somewhere, as the room was quite cold, and didn't look like any building he had ever seen in the city before. He said that he was out in the city because he was restless and thought he might as well try and have some fun. He was drinking downtown at a skeezy bar and then woke up here, so he thinks he might have been drugged. The name of the bar that he mentioned was miles away from his approximate location, almost half the state away. When he first woke up, there were a few men in the room waiting for him. There were a few men in full lab coats and wearing face masks standing behind them, just waiting there. They had full hazmat suits on and everything. The phone reception kept going in and out, so some of the details are a little fuzzy, but he mentioned that the men he saw standing in front of him were rich and powerful. He told me that they were well known, and that he was drowsy when he woke up, so it didn't click instantly for him, but after thinking on it for a while, he recognized them. He had seen them before. The call kept dropping in and out while he was giving me this information, and I was writing it all down as fast as I could. I got a few words here and there about movies and about a cult, but I could be wrong because it was so hard to hear. I think he tried to tell me more about them and mention some names, but the call was too spotty to hear. He started his sentence with a T and kind of like a T sound, which I guess could be something like Tom or any kind of name starting like that, if that's what he was trying to tell me. He might not have even been telling me a name. Then he tried to say something like Rolf, but I guess it could have been more like Ruth, or Rolf or Ralph maybe. Again, that's if he was trying to tell me a name. I wasn't 100% sure, so I noted down as many variations as I could think of that it could possibly be. He said one more thing, but I got none of it at all, and the connection only picked back up while he was in the middle of talking about what they did to him. When the connection picked back up, he was talking about something to do with an experiment, and that he was sure that he was not the only one, and that they were holding other people down here too. He told me he had heard the screams. At this point, I was beginning to wonder if this was some kind of elaborate prank by some guy who had way too much time on his hands. But we have to treat every call as if they are 100% real, even if it's obviously fake and our time is being wasted. I just had to stay silent and keep taking notes, as I could not risk speaking and having the man on the phone be found out or killed just due to a hunch. He said that they had two men in the hazmat suits come over to him, and they drew lines on him like you would see surgeons make on a patient's body to mark where they would make an incision. He said that there were tools laid out on a steel trolley, just in view of the edge of his peripheral vision that he could make out. Usual hospital equipment like scalpels and knives, but also a set of pliers as well as a needle with some kind of strange substance inside of it. Because it was on the edge of his vision, he could not make it out fully, but he knew it wasn't any kind of liquid he had ever seen. He immediately went silent after that. I started to hear loud steps echoing down the hallway for the phone. It sounded like whoever was making them was wearing very large leather boots. I could hear that muffled rustling against fabric again, so I assumed he put the phone back into his pocket or wherever he had managed to grab it from. I heard the creak of a door, and those same boot sounds got closer and closer to the phone. The man started speaking. He had some kind of New York accent, not stereotypical, but very distinct. The man spoke very directly and in short sentences. He told the man on the phone that it was his turn to be seen to. I suddenly heard some random laughing down the phone, still slightly muffled due to it being in some kind of pocket. It was more like a cackle, and the man says something like, "Do you think we wouldn't know?" But I don't know if he said that exactly, because of the connection of the call. He explained that they were watching him the whole time, and that there was a camera that he could not see due to the neck strap restricting his field of view. I could hear muffled sounds again, as I assumed the man pulled the phone out of his pocket, and he started speaking directly to me now. He told me to pay attention closely, because this would be the last time we ever heard about this. I started frantically asking questions to the man who called, asking if he was okay and who the man was. He started shouting immediately, "It's him, it's..." But his speech became muffled, and all I heard were sounds and groans. I assume he must have had a gag put on, or something, to stop him from speaking. The man told me that it would not be possible for dispatch to find where they were located, and that even if they did, he said that nothing would happen. I started to seriously lose my composure at this point, and shouted, asking, "What the fuck do you mean?" And my supervisor had to remind me to stay calm and focus on gathering information. I asked what he was going to do to him, if there were other people down there, and who the man was. The man told me that he needed him to help test some experiments that they had been running. He said something about how it was almost perfected, but that it still needed a little bit more work. He ignored my other questions and just started talking to me like he was giving a step-by-step guide while laughing all the way through. He told me that first he was going to inject the subject, and that then he needed to test his new pain tolerance, which I didn't really fully understand. I heard him grabbing something off the metal trolley, and I could hear the moans and the struggling of the collar trying to get away from whatever he was being injected with. I could hear him writhing, and it sounded like the straps were going to break, and that the chair would fall to the floor with how violently he was moving. After a few minutes had passed, the writhing and the moaning stopped. Just as a side note, dispatch had been out searching every building and side street in the approximate location of the cell tower that the phone had pinged off, but the area that had to be covered was obviously incredibly large. My supervisor was also liaising with police in the local area of where the man had said he last remembered being, but witnesses were largely uncooperative. The owner of the bar straight up told the police that no men matching that description had ever entered his bar or been anywhere near, and that he had been serving all night. He was adamant and basically shut down any kind of conversation with the police. They urged him to tell them anything he knew at all because of the seriousness of the situation, but he told the police that they were being pranked. He also refused to tell them who else was in the bar that night. That was basically it. It was so late, and with so little information, they couldn't track down any other people who would have been at the bar. It wasn't long before I heard muffled screaming again, as I heard what sounded like something piercing the collar's flesh. I heard multiple stabs again and again, and then heard the man making comments under his breath. This went on for maybe 5 more minutes in total, but it felt like a lifetime. The screaming and the stabbing did not stop the whole time, and I wondered how the caller could still possibly be alive. The man on the phone muttered something about how it wasn't potent enough, or something like that, and how he needed to conduct further tests, and then that was it. He said something down the phone that I couldn't make out because of the connection, and then he hung up. It sounded something like, "Hope you enjoyed the show," but again, I could not be sure. Lots of inquiries were made, and the police force worked tirelessly over the past few weeks, but we really didn't get much of a resolution. A large-scale search was launched in both the area where he went missing and in the area that his cell phone pinged, but not much was found. The bartender that the police had spoken to weirdly shut up shop and went out of town, and still has not returned, and the police have not been able to get a hold of him again. They think maybe he knew more than he was letting on, or was even possibly involved in spiking his drink and aiding his captors, but they didn't really have any evidence other than a hunch. The cops managed to track down a couple of people who were at the bar on the night of the men's disappearance, and they confirmed that he was actually there, but that he seemed pretty normal and not drunk and left under normal circumstances. It seems weird that the bartender would lie about something like that, but this witness testimony didn't exactly incriminate him. A wide-scale effort was launched, urging people to come forward with any information with a reward, but it was fruitless. His apartment was searched, and nothing was out of the ordinary. The caller had no family to contact, only a half-brother who lived over in Iowa, but had since moved from there, and the contact information we had on him was outdated. After weeks of no evidence, the case had to basically be unofficially closed, and although it wasn't officially put on the record, most of the department silently decided that it was just some kind of weird prank put on by some weirdos who got off on wasting police time. Personally, I don't know what to believe. I mean, why would whoever had him leave on the phone for us to listen to? It just seems stupid, and like maybe some idiots wanted to see how far they could take it. The things the caller was telling me just seems so far-fetched, but the sketchiness with the bartender still makes me second-guess everything. I don't know. Tell me what you think, please. I know I will probably never get any closure on this case, as happens with a lot of calls that I end up answering. But I'm really hoping for any kind of logical explanation that you can give. Thank you for reading. Alright, X. I have a story for you, so sit a while and listen. This takes place 3 summers ago, during a boar hunting trip, down in a very rural area of the Ozark South. My main reasoning for sharing this here is that, ultimately, I don't believe in the paranormal. However, I believe I may have run across something that I could not explain, and I want some input. Fair warning, I'm no good at Greentext. However, I'm not going to assault you with a wall of text. In any case, enough pretense aside. Be back from college and wanting to get out in the woods. Be bored as fuck on a Friday night and decide to head out super early for boar hunting with a buddy of mine, call him JD. JD is an Eagle Scout, not prone to being spooked very easily, and I have been hunting in places ranging from deep south swamps to Alaska. We pack our shit up and leave his place at around 12:30 a.m. After stopping for energy drinks and beef jerky, every hunter's best friends, we end up getting out there at around 2:15 a.m. We'd hunted this area for boar many times in the daylight, seen tons of deer, squirrels, and even a baby fawn that fell asleep by the warmth of our car engine once. Basically, it's a nice place. We pull in off the gravel tract, 40 miles from town, and 3 miles from a pedunk gas station / deer check station. Decide not to fuck about in the woods at night. We'd hit a mountain lion walk in our tracks on a previous hunting trip. Roll down windows and try to take a short nap. Instantly, we're hit with this nasty, cloying, sickly sweet odor. I just brush it off, going, just some wet deer, huh. Should mean our scent won't travel far in heavy damp air. JD just looks at me and says, that smells like death, bro. Like a cow that's been out in the sun for too long. I launch into a diatribe about him being a gigantic pussy and how he should deal with it. In any case, since we don't want either to be mucking about in woods home to mountain lions in the dead of night, or be accused of night hunting by some idiot ranger, we decide to go and check if the gas station is still open. Surprise, JD's shitty old 4-banger won't start. Fine, looks like it's a nap, followed by hunting while we wait for some toothless mechanic to come jumpstart his car. All the while, the smell just seems to be seeping in through the vents and the cracks in the windows. It gets to the point where I am actively retching in the car. Enough is enough, and we decide that if something had gone and died, we'd prefer not to be stuck in a gigantic tin can right beside the corpse. We get out of the car, parked in the middle of this gravel parking area, surrounded by tall grass on the north side, and woods on all the others. A swamp was to our direct west, full of boar, deer, and critters. As I'm sitting there, loading up the magazine to my rifle, JD just keeps scanning the tree line with his eyes. To the Europors and Northerners, hunting in swamps is close quarters. We hunt boar with semi-automatic rifles in the south. You want a quick follow-up shot in case the 400-pound ball of muscle with 8-inch tusks decides to charge you from 25 to 30 yards out. Something's got his hackles all up, but I'm feeling fine, so I just dismiss it as nerves. Anyway, suited up, we make our way down to the small footpath, 1 to 2 feet wide, that winds its way down into the swamp. However, reaching the tree line, we just both stopped, staring into the woods for a few minutes before either of us spoke. It was almost like shining a flashlight down a mineshaft where the darkness sort of dissipated the light. I could feel my skin crawl, and something deep in the hindmost parts of my mind told me to just walk right back to the center of the clearing and wait for light. Nope. So, we do what any caveman would have done in that situation. We grunted out a few excuses to preserve our manhood and went and sat the fuck down by his car. Like fuck, I'm going to bumble through woods with mountain lion, weed growers, and God knows what else at 3:15 a.m. by that point, in the goddamn morning. The mood lightened, and the smell had seemed to recede a bit, so we just busied ourselves checking our rifles and talking about girls, politics, and history. We are a weird bunch. After a while, the smell started coming back, and we began to voice our concern that something that smelled fucking dead was moving around. As the smell starts growing more and more oppressive, I start hearing branches and twigs break in the undergrowth. Whatever it is moving. I don't like that one bit. At this point, I'm thinking it's a mountain lion that's all covered in gore from a recent kill that's about to go full territorial mode. That would not have been out of the question, but it wasn't. As I strained to hear what it was, I noticed that the snapping didn't come from the pat 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 of a four-legged animal. It resembled the crunch of a novice hunter picking his way through the undergrowth. My first thought was either we had a ranger with a sick sense of humor, a drug grower with a great sense of humor, or worse, a motherfucking serial killer. Either way, weapons were shouldered, bolts closed on loaded chambers, and lights pointed towards where the sound was. Nothing. It's fucking nothing. Just the smell. And a now slower crunch crunch. And it stops. The smell is everywhere now, and whoever it is sitting far back enough in the tree line to not be silhouetted by our lights. Smart asshole. No eyeshine either, which ruled out just about any animal other than boar, which make enough noise to be easily noticeable. Once again, the caveman brain rears up deep within my psyche and tells me, fire. A fire, you idiot. Build a fire. So, what do? JD and I build a fucking fire. Throughout this whole affair, other than a few moments, we'd been mostly quiet. However, the fire gives us comfort, and whatever it is, seems to back off into the forest, if only for a while. As the fire burns hot, we start joking again, having a decent time, convincing ourselves it was only a cougar. However, there is only so much timber in a gravel clearing, and after a while, we'd have to venture out of the firelight to keep the fire going. That time came, and as the fire burned down to embers, the smell came back, more oppressive than before. And with that smell came an almost oppressive feeling of fear. Not regular fear, but an intense guttural fear that made your muscles tense, your stomach turn, and your eyes go wide. Every fiber of our being told us to get more wood, to keep the fire high. Only with fire would we survive the night. So we cautiously walked to the closest tree line, barely able to see from the dying light of the fire. We'd been trying to save our flashlights. I was on guard duty, as we figured that my setme .308 semi-automatic would be a better standoff weapon than JD's small carbine. I'm tacticaling the fuck out at this point, adrenaline flowing from a profound feeling that something just is not right. JD leans down into the undergrowth to pick up a stick, reaching into the tree line. He screams and falls backwards while branches break right in front of him. He gets up, freaking out, dusting himself off, saying he saw something staring at him first. Sunken eyes, a thick brow ridge, ashy gray skin. Then, it smiled at him. Not so much as smiled, but curled back its lips in a Cheshire grin. We are at Nubcon 1, gentlemen. I am going to ignore the next hour of this hopscotch game of the fire dying, the smell growing more intense, him, as we call it now, drawing nearer, building the fire back up, and him retreating back to stay away from the firelight. However, it should be noted that this entire time, he was circling us, probing our defenses, seeing if he could find a way to get up close without being seen. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, we'd exhausted almost all of the dry firewood that was not within the tree line, except for the tall grass on the northeast side of the road, and we, of course, do what we have to do, and slowly pick our way over to the tall grass. By this point, I have taped a flashlight to my rifle, and switch it on as we leave the fire to get some dry grass. As JD is filling his hands with tinder, I check my right-hand side and look down the road. I wish I hadn't. Just as I swing my flashlight over the road, I see him for the first time. It's grayish black, with either sloughing skin or matted gray fur. I honestly could not tell. It crossed the 10-yard wide track what seemed like instantly. Hunched over, maybe 5.5 to 6 feet tall, moving like a gorilla does. It's over. Something in my head just starts screaming, it's over. It knows you've seen it. It's not just being territorial. It's circling like a predator. It is a predator. That feeling had not been one of fear, but of impending predation. Somehow, the lower parts of our subconscious had known what was going on long before we did. In any case, we ran back to the fire, popped the dry grass on top, and waited for the smell to recede. It didn't. It was close, very close, and this time it was not moving. So we pushed out and got in the trunk of JD's car and listened as it passed behind the front of his car, back into the trees. In a burst of brilliance, I decide that we either make the 3-mile run through dark countryside to the gas station and pray the lights are on, or we build a fire big enough that one of the farmers or someone driving on the main road can see it. We end up deciding that sprinting 3 miles through dark countryside, guns on our backs, could at the worst get us devoured by him or shot by a terrified farmer. So, we do the next best thing. I pull a fucking small tree out of the ground. I'm not talking about a bush. I'm talking about a small 8 to 9 foot tree. It is amazing what adrenaline can do for you. So much adrenaline where your facial muscles are drawn tight and your eyes dilate to being nearly black. JD's description of my face. In any case, the fire burns bright, very bright after a while, and he retreats further into the woods. The fucking tree burned a long-ass time. Eventually, maybe 13 minutes after throwing the tree on the fire, 3 lifted trucks come barreling down the road and fly into the gravel parking area. The first truck had an obscene amount of those off-road lights on the bull bar and roof, which lit the whole glade up like the fucking sun. The smell almost goes away entirely, still there, but almost imperceptible. No one gets out of the first truck. A man wearing a National Guard t-shirt and ACU pants hops out of the second truck with his hand on his hip, concealed pistol. He questions us for about 10 minutes, makes us disarm, clear our chambers, and set our rifles in JD's car. He tells us there's a burn ban, we shouldn't be out here fucking around, etc., etc. We explain our car died when we came out hunting and made that as a signal fire. He just looks at us strangely at the word hunting, walks back to truck number 1, comes back, tells us not to come back there unless we have all our ducks in a row. Truck 3 drives over and a man hops out to jumpstart our car. I shake his hand and thank him profusely, and he gives me a worried but sympathetic look. He doesn't say much, but he walks back to his truck and drives away. Truck 2 drives away shortly thereafter. Once we've got all of our shit packed up, Truck 1's windows roll down, and a rather fat man in a polo calls me and JD over. There's no boar here, boys. If you're hunting for boar, you best be looking further on down the road, at least on the other end of County Redacted. Bullshit. Tons of boar in there. But I don't say that. I'm not going to mouth off to the hillbilly militia that just saved my life, so I thank him for his advice. JD and I get back in his car, debating whether he had gone away with all of the commotion. Just as soon as Fatty McLightbar had pulled out, the smell returned yet again. Nope. We are out. Hop on the gravel road, drive to the highway, drive past a few farms, and make our way toward the western border of the county that we were in. We notice we are being followed by a small white Honda. Guess who's sitting in the front seats? Fatty McLightbar and hillbilly militiamen. They follow us all of the way out of the county and then turn around. So ends my experience. It's hard to get Greentext to express emotion, the exact description of the smell, or the fucking primal fear we felt. I wrote an after-action report of sorts the morning after that hunt, but haven't been able to find it after I moved, hence the Greentext. In any case, I've debated going back with more than 2 people to hunt him, but I'd like to know exactly what I was dealing with. This is, of course, not touching the fact that the Hillbilly Militia Patrol seemed to know more than they were letting on. Ideas, X-Files?